Lloyd looked up at the massive swarm of locusts filling the sky. Javier stepped forward and drew his sword. Anger filled his face as he unleashed mana blast after mana blast into the swarm, his swings heavy with rage. But even that was not enough to defeat something so vast. The swarm surged forward. It closed in on Javier, swallowing him whole, and he vanished beneath it, devoured. Lloyd snapped out of the vision. His face was pale, his breathing heavy, sweat running down his skin. He questioned the system, asking what he had just seen and whether it was truly going to happen. The system gave only a vague answer, telling him he could choose whether to believe it or not. Lloyd sprang to his feet, determination hardening his expression. He dashed toward the palace. If the skill had been called a spoiler, then it had to be true. As he ran, he remembered the other Lloyd's words, that if only he had arrived earlier. He knew he had to return to the estate as soon as possible. He already understood why that future had happened, and he needed to move fast so he could deal with it. Lloyd made his way to the Queen and informed her of the impending monster attack, telling her that the entire Cremo region would be destroyed if nothing was done. He urged her to mobilise the troops to stop the approaching disaster. The Queen asked him to elaborate, questioning how all of this was happening. Lloyd told her it was the work of the nation of Asfahan. He explained that they were attempting to create a domino effect, using monsters to slowly wear down their defences. He further clarified that Asfahan was driving the monsters from their natural habitats and forcing them directly toward their borders. As he spoke, Lloyd wondered why this was happening now. It should have occurred 3.5 years in the future, and it should not have affected the Frontera estate. He did not understand why the details had changed, but there was no time to dwell on it. He had to save his home. The Queen considered his words. She admitted that it could be possible, as there had been unusual movement in the eastern wilderness recently. She then turned her gaze back to Lloyd and asked how he knew all of this. Lloyd began to sweat. He had not prepared an excuse this time. The Queen continued, saying that she also suspected he was hiding more from her. She told him plainly that to her, he looked the most suspicious of all. Lloyd licked his lips as an idea formed. He told the Queen that he had a blood pact with the orcs of the wastelands, specifically the Sand and Steel tribe. He claimed they had sent him word through a carrier pigeon. He then explained how he had known about the assassination attempt. He said he had noticed Kyle having a strange exchange with several suspicious individuals and had overheard what sounded like a coded phrase. After that, he explained his ability to absorb mana from his surroundings. He reminded her that Javier was a genius and that they had been together since childhood. He claimed that Javier had taught him a secret technique to defend himself from attacks, before arrogantly declaring that he himself was also a genius. The Queen listened, her eyes narrowing. What he said made sense. And yet she glared at him, thinking that it felt as though he were making everything up on the spot. Lloyd looked up at her, wondering if she had realised exactly that. After a tense pause, the system alerted him that his title, Magento I Will Carry You, had activated. He now had the Queen's complete trust. No matter how much others accused him, she would never suspect him. The Queen told Lloyd that she would grant his request. She would give him 500 soldiers to command, along with 50 mages for support. Lloyd grinned widely as he thanked her. She asked why he was thanking her, reminding him that such support would not come without a price. Lloyd replied that of course he understood. Nothing in life was free. He told her that if he succeeded in stopping the monster attacks, he would proclaim that it was Her Majesty's foresight that had given them the means to defend their home. The Queen smiled at him. She told him that she had never met anyone as suspicious as he was, but that she was glad they understood each other. Lloyd and Javier saddled 2 enchanted horses and rode off at an incredible pace. They moved so fast that the rushing air pulled at Lloyd's face. Javier asked him to explain the plan, but Lloyd struggled to speak through the wind. After several attempts, he finally managed to force out a sentence, telling Javier that they had to reach the Frontera estate within 5 days. As Lloyd rode, he thought about Javier's firepower. With it, they could overpower the army of a small nation. Even the sight of Javier wielding his power would be enough to demoralize most forces. But mindless monsters would not care about fear or intimidation. They would just keep coming. There was another problem. The swarm would attack from all sides, making it difficult to prepare any proper defense. Lloyd knew Javier alone would not be enough if he wanted to save everyone. He called out to Podong. The creature popped out of his coat, greeting him with a cheerful smile. Lloyd told Podong to meet him later, at the exact time they had discussed. Podong leapt away from Lloyd, determination burning in its eyes. As they charged onward, Lloyd thought that he had a plan. He could do this. They would save their home. Several days later, they arrived at the outskirts of the Frontera barony. From a high ridge, Lloyd looked out over the distant farmland and saw the swarm already hanging above it. He realised that if he had arrived any later, there would have been no chance to save anyone. Below, the farmers looked up at the sky, confused by the black haze spreading overhead. Suddenly, Lloyd appeared behind one of them and shouted, demanding to know why he was standing around and ordering him to get everyone inside. The man jumped in surprise at Lloyd's sudden appearance. Lloyd then told him to bring him the lid from his largest pot. At the Frontera manor, something suddenly crashed through a window, narrowly missing a maid. It was a giant locust. The creature turned its attention to her, hissing as it bared its sharp teeth. It scurried toward her, and the maid recoiled in terror. Marbella appeared and swung a chair, smashing it down and splattering the locust's head. More locusts burst through the windows. The two of them ran for safety. As Marbella ran, she glanced back through a window, her eyes widening when she saw how many more filled the sky. Arcos came around the corner, asking frantically if she was all right. He then told her that they had to reach Bayan and the others. They burst through the main doors and ran outside. A massive swarm waited directly in front of them. Elsewhere, Bayan ran through the streets trying to coordinate a defence. He saw a farmer struggling to fend off a large locust. Bayan hesitated. The villagers were in danger, but his first duty was to protect his master. Then he remembered what Arcos had once told him. If the estate was ever in danger, he had asked Bayan to protect the people before protecting him, saying that the people were what mattered most. Bayan gritted his teeth and turned back. With a swift strike, he chopped off the monster's head, saving the farmer. More locusts appeared. Bayan told the farmer, Michael, to get behind him, as a swarm gathered in front of them. All around the estate, people fought for their lives, struggling to fend off the swarm. Everything looked perilous. The defenders were being pushed back, and it seemed as though defeat was close. Then a voice shouted at the swarm, calling them maggots. Lloyd and Javier arrived. Lloyd held the lid of a large pot, while Javier struck it with his sheathed sword. The sound rang out loudly. The swarm reacted instantly. Their attention shifted at once, turning toward the source of the noise. Moments later, the swarm lifted into the air and surged forward, heading straight for Lloyd and Javier. From a distance, Arcos and Marbella froze. They thought they recognized that voice. It had to be Lloyd. Lloyd and Javier spurred their horses forward, racing away at full speed as they led the swarm with them. Javier commented that Lloyd's plan seemed to be working, noting that the swarm was now fully focused on them. Lloyd told him they needed to keep gathering them and make a full lap around the estate. As they circled the grounds, Javier continued hammering the pot lid like a gong. The repeated impacts began to take their toll on Lloyd. He shouted for Javier to stop hitting it so hard, but when he glanced over, Javier was grinning widely. Lloyd asked why he seemed to be enjoying himself at a time like this. Javier only replied that the next one was coming, striking the lid again as even more of the swarm followed. Lloyd then told Javier that their next destination was the Lacona territory. Javier's eyes widened. Was he really going to protect their neighbours as well? Javier's approval rating rose by 3 immediately. But all Lloyd was thinking about was that he could not afford to lose the income from their water bill. At the manor of Viscount Lacona, the Viscount ran in terror as the swarm invaded his home. Just as he thought it was over, Lloyd and Javier burst through a wall on horseback, ringing their makeshift gong as they passed through. The Viscount looked up in shock, recognising Lloyd. Lloyd glared at him as they rode past, warning him not to be late on his water bill. The Viscount recoiled in fear as Lloyd and Javier continued on, the swarm chasing after them. Javier asked if that had really been Lloyd's plan, to concentrate the swarm by leading it through the Viscount's manor. Lloyd scoffed and replied that there was no plan. He said he just wanted to be an arsehole, grinning like a madman. Javier recoiled in disgust, wondering what was wrong with him. As Lloyd rode around, gathering the locusts behind him, he kept shouting that Lloyd the Great was coming through to save them all. Javier told him to conserve his strength, saying that shouting was not helping them gather the locusts. Lloyd asked if Javier was dense. He grinned and told him that shouting like this would let everyone know who had saved them, and that he intended to milk the moment as much as possible. Javier's disgusted expression returned as he concluded that there was definitely something wrong with Lloyd. They headed toward the wetlands, where a massive swarm was already waiting. Javier told Lloyd to raise the pot lid above his head at an angle and fall back. Javier unleashed his sword aura and began cutting his way through the swarm. Lloyd followed close behind, deflecting what remained. They finally broke through to the other side, with more of the swarm still following them. Lloyd shouted at Javier that they had managed to gather most of them together. They stayed ahead of the swarm as they pushed toward their destination. Then the horses began to tire. Lloyd noticed it right away and realised they would not be able to keep going much farther. He called out to Javier, telling him to prepare his back. Javier asked what he was talking about, clearly confused. Lloyd jumped off his horse and onto Javier's back, telling him that he was his steed now and to run. Javier dismounted as Lloyd shouted, "Hiya!" treating him like a horse. Javier was not amused, but he ran anyway, anger flaring as he moved. Fortunately, a swordmaster was just as fast as a horse, and Javier managed to keep his distance. The swarm stayed close behind as they reached their destination, the river. Bangle and Hamang were waiting for them when they arrived. Lloyd and Javier jumped into a ditch just in front of them. Bangle turned, pointed her rear toward the swarm, and unleashed a massive volcanic blast. When the rest of the swarm caught up, Lloyd called for round 2, telling Hamang to use its spray shot. Hamang fired a massive burst of water into the swarm, wiping out another large portion of it. What remained was only the tail end. Javier and Lloyd teamed up, releasing a dual mana blast that destroyed the last of the swarm. Lloyd collapsed onto the ground, out of breath, saying that it had been exhausting. Javier warned him that while they had dealt with most of the swarm, there were still locusts remaining, at least a few thousand. Lloyd smiled as he lay flat on the grass and told him not to worry. The cleanup crew should be arriving right about now. Podong appeared, leading the Sand and Steel tribe out of the forest. Moments later, the White Cavalry and the mages arrived, acting on the Queen's orders. The cavalry commander shouted to his men to exterminate every last one of the monsters as the remaining forces moved in to finish off the locusts. The orcs celebrated by roasting the locusts and eating them. A maid approached one of the orcs and handed him a flower, thanking him for saving her earlier at the manor. She then ran away in embarrassment. The orc blushed as well. Lloyd's parents ran toward him, calling his name. They both hugged him tightly as Lloyd told them that he was fine. Arcos spoke next, telling Lloyd that he had saved everyone and apologised that he had not been able to do anything himself. Marbella then asked Lloyd, her voice filled with worry, why he kept putting himself in danger to save others. As they held on to him, Lloyd thought that he had only saved them for his own selfish reasons. The system scoffed at him, asking if he had already forgotten what he had said in the ending spoiler. Lloyd asked what it meant, but the system told him to forget it. Lloyd thought that it was not over yet. There was still a second wave to come. The system then alerted him that he had learned a new title, Round 1 Pick by Terminix Pest Control. Within the Frontera and Lacona territories, simply looking at bug-type monsters would now send them fleeing in fear. Later that evening, Lloyd went to the dueling ring and met with the leader of the White Cavalry, Commander Valillard Blanc. Valillard asked Lloyd why he had requested the meeting. Lloyd thanked him for coming and told him he had his gratitude for the crucial role the White Cavalry had played in the fight against the locusts. Valillard dismissed the praise, telling Lloyd that anyone could see they had merely been the clean-up crew. Lloyd corrected him, saying that without them it would have taken weeks to eliminate the remaining monsters, and that thanks to their efforts it had been done in half a day. Valillard said that he had not been pleased at first about Lloyd being given command over his cavalry, but after arriving and witnessing the situation firsthand, he had seen what kind of strategist Lloyd was, and realised that it had not been luck that he had saved their queen. He then admitted that his pride was still hurt, and asked why Lloyd had sent the mages back while keeping his men stationed here. Valillard stated bluntly that he did not like Lloyd. He told Lloyd that he had spoken his truth, and that now it was Lloyd's turn to answer, asking him directly why he had kept the White Cavalry here. Lloyd already knew this man. From the book, he remembered Valillard as a commander of the White Cavalry who had once fought Javier under orders from the evil Queen Alicia. They had battled relentlessly, each fighting for his own cause. Javier had barely managed to defeat him. Afterward, Valillard had lain bleeding, making a final request of Javier to stop the Queen. He was uncompromisingly loyal, a formidable warrior, and a man who spoke plainly. Lloyd knew he had to be direct with a man like this. He asked Valillard to fight him. Lloyd told Valillard that if he won the duel, the White Cavalry would join the estate's engineer corps, but if Valillard won, he would be free to return to his queen. Valillard studied Lloyd intently, then smiled, saying that Lloyd had already figured him out. His expression then turned serious as he told Lloyd that he could not possibly fight a civilian without an order from his queen. Lloyd grinned and told him that he had forgotten something. He reminded Valillard that he had been granted command over the White Cavalry by the Queen, and he formally ordered him to fight. Valillard's face twisted with anger at Lloyd's words. Lloyd told him that even if he ordered him to shovel dirt, Valillard would likely feel dishonoured by such a task, but if the same outcome was decided by a duel, it would be considered knightly. He asked Valillard if he was wrong. Valillard asked Lloyd if he had his own weapon as he reached for his sword. Lloyd raised his shovel and nodded. Valillard said that he had heard Lloyd had punished the estate's traitor with that shovel, and that he would not take him lightly. Lloyd thought to himself that Valillard had taken the bait, but his chances of winning were 0. Even with a triple heart circle, he knew he could not win. Valillard was skilled with a sword, and had been a match for Javier in the book. But Lloyd had another weapon, one even more powerful than a sword, Valillard's own personality. Valillard then told Lloyd exactly what he had expected. He said that if he were to duel a civilian, then for the sake of honour there would need to be a handicap. Valillard told Lloyd that he would not move from his spot, and that if Lloyd could make him flinch, Lloyd would be considered the winner. Lloyd's grin twisted as he charged his shovel with a mana blast and fired it at Valillard. Valillard leapt out of the way in terror as the blast tore past him and blew the top off a mountain in the distance. He stared at the ruined peak, then slowly turned his head back toward Lloyd as fear took hold of him. Lloyd collapsed to the ground, completely drained after expending all the mana he had. Then he laughed like a crazed villain. After that, Lloyd gained an additional 500 labourers. They were put to work digging a trench. At one point, one of the soldiers threw down his shovel in irritation. He spoke to Valilard, saying that they were knights, and asked why they were being made to perform hard labour. Valilard lowered his head slightly and told him that this was not just a simple order. The man looked at him in confusion. Valilard thought back to Lloyd's words, that wielding a shovel could sometimes be more honourable than wielding a sword. He continued digging and told the man that there was something he needed to understand, instructing him to cooperate. Overlooking another project, Javier asked Lloyd if he truly believed his plan would work. Lloyd told him that the orcs had taught him this trick and to trust him. Several days later, the town shook, and the entire estate trembled in fear. People prayed that Master Lloyd would protect them once more. The white cavalry gathered, awaiting the enemy. At the front, Valilard realised that Lloyd had been right again. The second wave was coming. A massive herd of mastodons was stampeding straight toward the estate. Valilard thought back to his earlier conversation with Lloyd, when Lloyd had told him that the mastodons would come next. He had asked Lloyd what evidence he had to reach that conclusion. Lloyd had blatantly lied and said that it was obvious. After a pause, Valilard had asked what exactly was obvious. Lloyd had avoided the question, and only now did Valilard realise just how skilled Lloyd was at dodging questions. With the stampede in sight, there was no time left for doubt. Valilard placed his helmet on, readying for battle. He considered the strategy needed to stop the stampede, estimating that there would be at least 10 casualties. One of the soldiers spoke one of those cursed lines people always said before dying, announcing that he would propose to his girlfriend after the battle. Valilard wondered grimly whether he would be congratulating her or consoling her once it was over. He shouted for his men to prepare to charge, but his command was cut short by a voice telling him to wait. Sabayan approached. Valilard recognised him immediately and asked why he was not wearing any armour. Sabayan replied that Lloyd had told him he did not need it. Valilard became flustered and asked if Lloyd had lost his mind. Sabayan answered casually that Lloyd might look strange, but he was used to it by now. Sabayan then told Valilard why he was there. He explained that he was there to decipher Lloyd's messages for them. Confused, Valilard asked what he meant. Sabayan pointed toward a large rock in the distance and asked if Valilard could see Lloyd standing on it. He then explained that he would relay any messages Lloyd sent. Lloyd stood atop the rock holding 2 large flags and began waving them in a coordinated pattern. Sabayan watched the motions carefully, then told Valilard that Lloyd had ordered the white cavalry to move to the southeastern edge of the village and to move quickly. Valilard asked what kind of nonsense that order was, questioning why they were being repositioned in a way that opened the front for the mastodons. Lloyd waved the flags again. Sabayan translated calmly, saying that if Valilard kept arguing, Lloyd would tattle on him to the Queen. Valilard stared at him in shock and asked if he had really just said that. The mastodons drew closer as Lloyd waved his flags, alerting Sabayan that they had arrived. Lloyd grinned to himself. Phase 1 was complete. As the mastodons charged forward, they suddenly came to a halt. In front of them stood a massive beast carved into the mountainside. This was the plan for Phase 1, to block the mastodons' path with a false image of their natural enemy, the Megalania. Now came Phase 2. Lloyd waved his flags again, ordering the white cavalry to make as much noise as possible with their steeds, to kick up a thick cloud of dust, and to slam their lances together as loudly as they could. Valilard followed the orders, even as he wondered why they were doing any of this. The noise created by the cavalry echoed across the land. The mastodons panicked and fled in the opposite direction, believing their enemy was approaching. They began heading north, exactly as Lloyd had intended. Valilard watched in disbelief as the herd changed course. He knew what lay in that direction. The ditch they had dug only days earlier. Phase 3 followed. The mastodons fell into the ditch, and Hamang blasted them with its water shot, sweeping them away from the estate. Lloyd waved his flags once more, declaring victory.